Welcome back to another session here with Zendoc Labs. My name is Raphael. I'm the CEO of Zendoc Labs. We are a team of ex-founders and ex-VCs that help startups generate demand and unlock growth opportunities because we know that missing growth is the number one killer of startups. Today, we are going to look at one of the most exciting, most interesting, most useful frameworks that we know in our work that has been developed by a founder as well. It's called the Bullseye Framework. Some of you may know the Bullseye Framework from the book called Traction, which was written by Gabriel Weinberg. Gabriel Weinberg is the founder of DuckDuckGo. DuckDuckGo is a very popular search engine alternative to Google that prioritizes privacy. And in his work, he bootstrapped the company as far as I remember, and he went from 0 to millions of users through this framework that he has developed, or he used it, and then afterwards, once he figured out what the underlying patterns are, developed this framework based on it. And so we want to have a look at it today because we think it's a really effective tool for designing and executing lean growth strategies that are focused on what really matters. And it's also the first step in a journey that many companies and startups need to take from thinking about marketing and sales in a siloed way toward thinking about marketing and sales as two tools within your toolbox for achieving what you're looking to achieve, which is growth. And so obviously, as we're thinking about here at Zendoc Labs, is that growth is an integrated efforts between these two, also including strategy, also including product operations and funding, of course, because without any of these, you cannot grow your company. So it takes you on the journey toward an integrated thinking. And we're excited about that. So I'm going to, in a moment, pull up the framework on a slide, and we're going to go through it. Before I do so, if you like the content we publish, or if you have questions about what we say, drop a comment below, hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, or just reach out to us via email. We always love hearing from everyone that is in the startup ecosystem. Even if you are just a company that has already a track record and is kind of seeing that your growth is starting to slow or even decline, reach out to us. There are definitely parallels that we can apply from the startup world to what you are doing. So without further ado, we're going to pull up the framework. I'm switching to my shared screen here, readjusting my microphone as I always do. And, we have the slide pulled up here. It's, as I said, the Bullseye Framework. And on the left side, you find an illustration of what the framework actually looks like. We took this from a blog that we found online. And then a description based on our experience, based on what Gabriel says. And we're going to try to make this most impactful and relevant based on case studies. Now, I did mention that this framework was developed by Gabriel Weinberg, the founder of DuckDuckGo. I think from my perspective, this framework is most impactful in the account entry phase. That's the phase where, especially for B2B startups, many struggle in the beginning where you don't even get the foot in the door with buyers. And so even if you are excellent at sales, if you don't have a way for getting the foot in the door, you're already screwed at that step. So that's where I find this framework to be particularly helpful. However, if you get good at growth, at marketing, at sales, the activities that you run, even in the account or for account entry, are insanely impactful across the entire buyer journey, across the entire decision-making journey. And we have a separate video on that too for the B2B space, but it fundamentally also applies to B2C because, you will move leads along the funnel more effectively and you will also please customers that have signed up already in a more effective way. As one example, if you were to engage in a content generation strategy, that's great for generating and creating demand, but it's also great for continuously demonstrating your expertise to existing customers. That's certainly my experience in the startups that I've built. And now how this framework works is in 3 steps. Gabriel says, first think of what's possible, then think of what's probable, and then think of what's working. These are the 3 steps along which he has designed his framework. And the first step here is what's possible. He essentially says, be very creative, come up with all kinds of marketing and sales ideas that you can come up with, do the brainstorming here. And he helps you with ideas for what the channels are on top of which you can run certain growth tactics. And that's what the framework on the left really shows. In the outer ring of this bullseye, by the way, is kind of probably a term that comes from throwing darts, where you're trying to hit the center, but it has rings with different kind of tiering points. Look at the outer circle here and think of, for instance, social and display ads as one execution that you could use in your growth strategy. Another one could be, targeting blogs in your market and publishing content on them. One, to just be on that blog, but also to generate backlinks back to your website, which are the most impactful tool for generating demand authority for your website, which ultimately determines whether your page and your landing pages and your blogs, whatever it is, gets listed as a top priority for certain queries. Another example here, and it's part of, that's what we said of, that's why we said it's an integrated view of sales and marketing / growth. Another tactic that he talks about is sales or trade shows or speaking engagements, things that would traditionally be probably bucketed under, cold sales, going outbound, and just generally what sales does. And so you find that as an execution that you can run here if you think for your specific market it's relevant. Now, if you're a B2C company, where you're probably going to focus on is more things like, display ads, social ads, paid social works wonderfully, probably blogging, probably content, most likely, hopefully, community management, viral marketing. At the very top here, affiliate marketing could be relevant for you, email marketing could be relevant for you, offline ads to existing platforms, where existing platforms could be something like using, if you think about the eBay and PayPal method, the way PayPal grew initially is by being available for power users on eBay. So there is an existing platform that's being leveraged by the technology that you're building, which kind of potentially cuts down your customer acquisition costs significantly. What I was saying, the bigger point here is, depending on whether you're a B2C or B2B, there will be certain executions and tactics here that are relevant for you more than if you are a B2B company. And if you're a B2B company, it's the same, right? If you're a B2B, you probably need some level of sales, certainly for bringing leads across the finish line, especially if you are an enterprise SaaS, just because your deals are so expensive, hard to understand value up front, and risky for the companies that you work with, because they have to change their processes, their operating model. They may run regulatory risks by adopting your tool, etc., etc. So you probably need a sales element, and trade shows in many industries is just still where you are having the most effective way of meeting potential buyers. Unfortunately, I hate trade shows, but they just tend to work. If any one of you guys has ever gone to a trade show, it's the most, at least for me as a seller, it was the most life-sucking experience of my life. I was crushed psychologically for a few weeks after trade shows that I went to, but they were just so effective at achieving certain business objectives in certain industries that are typically a little bit more conventional and sort of legacy. So the first step, as we were talking about, is just, think of what's possible in marketing and sales, depending on what kind of business you are in. The framework gives you certain ideas in the outer ring. Then once you have identified your long list of ideas, intuitively, you need to think about what's probably going to work. And so here, Gabriel, and I support that, says, well, you will promote 3 to 5 ideas to the inner ring. And the way that you promote these ideas is based on more opinions, or maybe past experience that you have, where you're thinking about, how likely is this tactic going to work? How fast is it going to work? How much do I have to spend for making it work? Do I have the internal capabilities in order to make it work? And so these are all opinions and assessments that you make as the leader of your company, as the growth generator for your company. And ideally, you select these tactics that you promote to the inner ring based on 2 criteria. One, they don't cost a lot of money to generate data on. Gabriel, and I think that's a great idea, especially for young startups that don't have a lot of cash, but in any other context it is also important, based on not spending much more than 1K per execution. You're never going to get perfect by spending 1K, but it should get you initial data on whether this could work or could not work directionally, not in a very specific level of detail here, I think, but you don't spend too much money, and then correspondingly also don't spend too much time. Ideally, you spend less than 1 week. Now, when I say that, obviously there are certain executions that are that by definition fit into that category, and there are others that are harder to make work at low cost and in a quick way, but they may still be impactful. So for instance, for us here at Zendoc, we do recognize that demonstrating our thought leadership and producing valuable content for our audience is important. When we first started doing it, we created shit content, not because the content wasn't bad. Sorry, that's probably the wrong way of framing it. The content was good, but the quality in which we produced it wasn't excellent, and it still not is. Right, I'm sitting here in a room. I have a cupboard in the back. The quality can be much better, but that's all to say we're still figuring out how to make content work. We think there is potential. We want to test it quickly. We don't want to invest a ton of time. And then if we get initial signals that this works, we're going to continue investing in it and doubling down on the tactic. And that's the mentality that you have to get to here, because otherwise, if you let's say you prioritize TV, trade shows, search engine marketing, and a blog, especially a blog, if you want to make these work really, really well, it's going to, take you easily 6 to 12 months. A blog, if you don't have domain authority today, if you're already an established business, it's a different story. But if your domain authority is low, it's just going to take time until it's generating results for you. At least when I was starting my first business, Eternity, I thought that blogging is a good idea because it gives you also the ability to put that content onto Instagram, for instance, and have something to say on that platform that's actually value creative. But the blog itself, until it starts to rank on Google, it took more than a year because we had zero domain authority. I needed to build partnerships first. I needed to find friends and family who had existing websites that would link back to us. I needed to remove certain on-page issues. For instance, we had a subdomain for our blog instead of a subfolder. That's a critical error that many people are making in the beginning when they're building a blog. If you're Google, you can go for a subdomain. If you're a large business, you can go for a subdomain. But as a startup, there is no reason for you to go with subdomains. You need to go with subfolders. Because then the domain authority of your main page is shared with the blog, rather than when you do a subdomain, it's not shared. So there are certain executions that take a longer time. That's the major point that I'm making here. Think about what's the fastest way here, the cheapest way to test the specific execution and generate initial results by cutting away some of the fluff that you would otherwise potentially consider including, in order to get these traction tests done as fast as possible. And essentially, as you run these tests, you're looking to answer three questions. The first one is, how much is it likely going to cost to acquire a customer through this tactic, through this channel? So for instance, when we were running paid social and B2C at Eternity, the first tactic that I was running was Google search engine advertising, search engine marketing. I thought on high intent queries, but it turned out that very few people actually converted on it, and our customer acquisition cost was about $7 to $8, I think, back then per sign up. Then when we switched to paid social, it dropped to 20 cents. That was before iOS 14. After iOS 14, it was a little different, but before it was at 20 cents. I mean, that's a step, step change. Much better. And then the second question you're looking to answer is how many customers are available through this channel. For Zendoc Labs, for instance, the way we started is by but by being on Upwork, which is a freelance platform, and reaching out to customers proactively, because you would not get inbounds at that, or we would not get inbounds at that stage. What we've realized with Upwork, though, is that the number of companies on Upwork that we think are interesting to work with, startups that are venture funded, be that in B2B or B2C, and in verticals that we have domain expertise in, was actually really limited. And so while we continue to have Upwork as sort of a little bit of a revenue engine for us that we use whenever something comes inbound, we are not actively pursuing it anymore, because we've realized that there are not that many customers available through this channel. And the last question is also a really important one. Are these the customers, the right type of customers, the customers that you are looking for, the customers that fit the ideal customer profile that you have defined in your go-to-market strategy? Same story for us at Zendoc Labs on Upwork. We found that most of the times the companies that we would get in touch with are very inexperienced. Maybe some software development agency from India. Nothing against software development agencies, but it's really hard to explain them the concept of growth and why you need to invest in demand creation and in some of the strategies and tactics that we suggest here at Zendoc. So we found that Upwork was very limited in that channel. Obviously, when I was talking about eternity, same story with Google Search versus paid social. And then also as another example at Locavent, where I was heading demand generation and partnerships, it's an enterprise SaaS company. I was also selling to strategic accounts, wearing multiple hats. We found that, trade shows, for instance, were a highly effective, I was talking about that earlier, were a highly effective channel for us. What was much harder to pull off were, for instance, our blog or our press releases, for instance. All of those weren't the right type of customers that we were getting. So these are the 3 questions you're looking to answer in step number 2, what's probable. And then step number 3 is there is a focus here on what's working. And essentially you're in step number 2 with these traction tests, these quick and fast traction tests, ideally, you're looking to generate data that tells you here are the 1 or 2 things that work well. And among these 1 or 2 things, this is what works best. It is entirely possible that none of the traction tests that you're running works, and then you need to promote the next 4 to 5 ideas. And that's okay. But at this stage, you need to try to identify the one that really worked best. And then you focus 100%. And this is really, really important to get right. If you identify a channel that works well for you, that gives you the customers you're looking for at a customer acquisition cost that is okay for you, focus on it 100% of your resources and time. Now, or maybe 90% of your resources and time. Why am I saying that? Well, because if you, for example, want to be great at content, you first of all need to create great content, which takes a ton of time and effort, and then you need to think about distribution of that content. And as you distribute the content, there are many tactics or tactics that you cross-pollinate your distribution with in order to distribute your content. So for instance, you may, in order to get great at content, you may have to have a really good engine on LinkedIn. You may have to have a good engine on TikTok, a blog that you posted on, a website that needs to be working. So even if you just want to be great at one thing, there are typically cross-pollinated tactics that you need to bring in, cross-pollination that needs to happen in order for you to be excellent at that channel. As another example, paid social, right? If you want to be great at paid social and convert leads, as we were doing at Eternity, our main channels were Facebook and Instagram. We needed to have, also a great organic experience on Facebook and Instagram. Paid social was the channel that was working for us. It wasn't organic. Instagram is dead from an organic perspective unless you do reels. We needed to have a great organic experience still, because otherwise you don't have a social reputation and people won't convert on your ads, or it's much less likely. Similarly, we also need to have a great website, and building a great website for a B2C audience does take time and money, especially if you're a new company, but also if you're an existing company. And especially if you have multiple products where you need to have landing pages for each that you try to convert people on. So this 100% or 90% focus is really important. Now, why am I kind of going back and forth between 90 and a 100%? Well, even here at Zendoc Labs, where our resources are still limited, we are thinking about testing and exploring on an ongoing basis additional ideas that, for instance, may take a little longer to start taking off and showing results, or because we have additional bandwidth that we can continue testing, or because we're seeing that the first channel that we focused on starts to or is showing signs of exhaustion. So at some point, most channels, and for us at Eternity, that was the case with paid social, but at Locavent, for instance, it was the case with trade shows, just because there's so many trade shows. There's just a set number of trade shows in a given year. And typically of these trade shows, there may be 3 to 4 flagships every quarter, one perhaps, if you are lucky. And these are really the ones that you want to go to, where you want to have a great presence that are going to make a difference for your business. And so we couldn't, even if we would want to invest more in trade shows, send more people to these places, there was just not the possibility to do so. It's certainly also true during the pandemic, when all trade shows went online and people weren't as, leads are not engageable online as in the same way that they're offline. It's totally different, completely different. Certainly in our experience, that was the case. And so you want to continue experimenting on an ongoing basis with additional ideas that you have taken from this framework, applying the mentality, the testing, the experimentation-based mentality here that this framework is suggesting that you use in order to be ready for when your next channel stops working, Or when you acquire, let's say you go and raise the next round, at that point you may be able to hire more team members, you have higher growth expectations, and so maybe at that stage you need 2 functional growth channels that you need to be running at the same time, and you want to be ready for it. So that's why I'm saying 90 to 100%. Now, my last comment on this slide here is, in our experience, it can be helpful, both in your decision making in terms of which traction tests you prioritize, but also just in a general way of having a sense of what your long list of ideas are, is to map these against the seller or the buyer journey. Now, we have separate videos on what the seller and the buyer journey looks like, and I encourage you to check those out. In a nutshell, the seller journey is create demand, create demand, generate leads, convert leads, engage, and expand from where you are today. That's the basic seller journey. It's very, very actionable. You know what you're supposed to do next. The buyer journey typically includes steps like I'm unaware of my problem, I become aware of my problem, I evaluate alternatives, I negotiate for the price, and then ultimately I start using, I start engaging, I start churning, and then maybe I can be resurrected as a user, especially in B2C. That's the case many times. And so indexing your ideas, your long list against these steps can help, especially, for instance, I said one decision-making criterion as you promote ideas from the outer to the inner ring could be how fast they are going to lead to results. Well, tactics that are closer to someone actually showing buying intent and having recognized the problem already are typically faster in getting executed. Now, they're also typically more expensive because leads have already taken certain steps that are valuable for your business, and they may also be more competitive because everyone wants to be at these spots. For instance, Google search, right, is a channel where you capture existing demand. You don't generate demand with Google search engine marketing. At least that's my perspective on it. And so knowing that is helpful in understanding, hey, do I want to test this channel first, or do I go into creating demand first by doing content, for instance? I know that this is not immediately linkable in many cases even to revenue, for instance, and it usually takes a little longer, just for instance, because you have to become good at content production. So that's my last comment on this framework. I'll pause here. That was almost 22 minutes. I tend to take a little longer when I explain things, but I'm really passionate about this framework, and I hope that got through in how I went through it. I thank Gabriel Weinberg. In German we would say Weinberg, which means the mountain of wine. So if you like alcohol, this is a good surname. I guess thank you, Gabriel, for this framework. It's a great one, and also congrats on what you did at DuckDuckGo. Hope everyone else has similar traction or is going to experience similar traction applying this framework. It is definitely a framework that we help you use here at Zendoc as part of our overall growth and go-to-market strategies that we define and execute for you. So, keep on rolling, keep on grinding, reach out to us if you have questions, and have a great rest of your day.